All right, testing. Oh, wait, we're done with that phase. What's up, everybody? We're back. Episode 2, Season 2 of Talkin TV. I'm back. It's me, Dom. You guys know my nickname at this point. I feel like if I have to tell you guys, well, then you just clearly show that you haven't been listening. And I'm back once again with my co-pilot, Chris. So, Chris, I feel like I've accomplished something.
What's that, Dom?
I found your nickname.
Oh, yeah?
I mean, we're both nerds, right? But
yeah,
I definitely feel like I'm the movie nerd. That,
yeah,
that's
you're the movie nerd.
Damn it, spoiled my own the suspense that I was trying to generate.
All right,
but,
so if you're the movie nerd, then what did you figure out?
You're the TV nerd. It has to be. Chris the
All
TV
right,
nerd Evanko. It works. It's got a nice ring to it. It's got a nice ring to it.
TV nerd. I'm cool with that. I mean, this is definitely the most excited I've been for an episode in a while.
Better. So rather than getting it confused, we literally just merge it. We just make it initials. TVN. Chris TVN Evanko. Bro, I'm sold.
Sure, we can.
I'm sold.
I'm gonna have to. So we're gonna workshop this in the month of January, and then on February we'll see.
Nothing like workshopping in the first month of the year.
But for now, it's all we got. Exactly, that is true. That is very true. And so now, since that's all we have, I'd say let's rock with it. I definitely don't hate it.
Yeah.
I just want to see
TVN. I'm down with it.
Yeah, you know what? Let us know what you think.
Yeah.
Message us on Instagram or something.
We should make our first poll, like on Instagram.
I'm good with that. You actually want to make this our
first? Should Chris's
first?
Nickname be TVN, Y or N? Because that's like the thing that everyone does now is they just shorten everything to their first initials rather than like actual words.
You know what they say in radio, don't you?
What?
If you declare something on the air, it has to be.
It has to be.
So that's going to be our first poll.
I guess that happens.
When are we throwing that up so they know? Monday?
Yeah.
Right around when the Oscars announced their...
Yeah, right when the Oscars announced that.
Okay.
Yeah, quick shout out to the Academy Awards. Speaking of which, before we get into it, oh man, dude, Ricky Gervais' speech at the Golden Globes, like...
Brilliant.
Yeah, you literally
said everything.
No joke, you literally like took the words out of my mouth where it felt like Ricky was literally saying everything that we have been thinking for the last like 10 years.
He said everything I've wanted to say, but A, don't have the platform for it to resonate, and B, just I want to actually become something, so I don't want to get silenced.
And the thing that I love so much,
I don't care about that anymore because you can't live your life in fear.
And the thing that I love so much is the fact that besides the fact of just giving no fucks, he called out all of the celebrities about making their bullshit political stances that they clearly don't support at all before they got a chance to make them. And I was like,
oh, so good.
Yes.
Yes. And you watched the majority of the ceremony, and
I watched the whole thing.
No one did that, right?
I mean, I think the only major thing was they were talking about the Australian like bushfires, but like that's just kind of a thing of like everyone's talking about it. So it's like
that is very unfortunate. I hope that situation resolves sooner than later in the best way it can.
And good on them for donating. Donating to good charitable causes and saving animals is always a good thing.
Yeah, I thought of a segue, but it's like really crude and cruel, and I don't want to
I'm not
make
sure.
a joke
I feel like
this.
that's you got to figure that out if you want to utilize it. But anyway,
well, I was gonna say, like, speaking of like terrible things, we could just start this episode off. Today we're talking about our top 10 television shows of 2019.
I mean, if you're talking about terrible segues, then I guess, because I was going to say, since we're back here talking on Talkin TV, I think that, it fits that this is like, since like Watchmen, I think, our first episode since Watchmen where we're actually talking about TV. Boom!
Yeah. And so where I was going...
That's how you do a segue.
That is a good segue. And where I was going with the terrible stuff was... like we could start off with like the stinkers. Like we each picked a show that we thought was just god awful.
Yeah.
So basically, here's what we're going to be doing today, just so everyone knows. We're going to start off with the worst show we saw this year, and keep in mind that every show we're talking about is a show that either had a season air or debuted in the year of 2019.
Absolutely.
This isn't something we watched from 2017 in 2019. It's something that came out in 2019. So we're going to start off with. We're just going to, like, one each, just pick...
Pretty much. I mean, the thing that I want to preface with is that, again, the thing that makes the medium of TV so much more interesting than movies, I would say, is that rather than having it just be like, there would be a straight-up best or a straight-up worst, the thing about TV is, if it's bad, you're not going to watch it, It's very, very easy to just turn off something that you find is a bad show, or just stop watching. Like, I haven't watched Shameless in a while. I haven't watched any of these CW shows in a while. I stopped watching American Horror Story after Cult. Like, I just don't have enough time, and there's too much content to watch bad TV. So, in a way, I feel like that actually makes the bad TV shows worse, is when they can hoodwink us into thinking that they're going to be good for a majority of their turn, and then they have one of the shittiest finales ever.
Or it never picks up, or they just keep feeding you breadcrumb trails of nonsense. Yeah, you know that's the thing. And you bring up Shameless, which is an interesting show for me because seasons 1 through 4 of that show would go down on my list of like top 10 greatest television shows I've ever seen.
I love the first 4 seasons of that show.
But then since then, like there just hasn't been a return to form that has been really, if we're gonna be objectively speaking, and not just me being like, well, at this point I love the characters so much, everything they do is great. Like if we're gonna be objective, and that's the interesting thing about TV, right? Because you could love like season 2 of a show and then hate everything else, and it's like, well, that's possible.
It's true. If you want my opinion, if you want my humble opinion, the only actual good season of American Horror Story is season 2, Asylum. I think none of the other seasons are good.
Anthology shows are the perfect example of that.
They really are.
So without further ado, I mean, I feel like that was good. I'm glad you went there because like there's a reason why there's 2 different words. There's a TV and film are 2 different things because the mediums of storytelling, while being very similar, while both being considered film, are told in very different ways, can be dissected in very different ways, as we plan on doing here today, and therefore can be ranked in very different ways, right?
As said by Joel Cohen himself, movies have a beginning, middle, and end. TV has a beginning, middle, and then they never end.
That is true. And I'm sure he can speak to that, being one of the guys on Fargo, right?
One of the guys who directed the original Fargo.
Oh, the movie.
The original movie Fargo. Yeah, No Country for Old Men, Big Lebowski.
Gotcha.
Serious Man.
I forgot the brothers didn't go on to do the TV show.
Yeah, Noah Hawley.
I still gotta watch that.
Oh yeah, you do. Yeah, you do.
So speaking of
at a later time.
Yeah, that is spoilers, maybe. Hints.
Maybe.
Hints. So with that being said, I'm just gonna kick it in. Let's jump in to. We're just gonna do one each because like Dom wanted to go a little longer with this, and it's not like I think it's a bad thing to go longer with this. I just like as a creative feel that a creator.
Words.
I feel that like. I don't know. I don't want to be too negative because I don't want that negative energy to come into my art. Maybe that's just me being too much of a fucking Catholic Buddhist or whatever. But with that being said, so there was more than one bad TV show I saw this year, but the one I'm about to start off with was exceptionally terrible, which is why it's the one that got the vote here. We're talking about Netflix's The I-Land. That show was garbage.
Oh, wow. That's a show I haven't even heard of.
It has an 8% on Rotten Tomatoes. Wow. It's essentially a Lost 2.0 where basically, and the show is nothing more than an elevator pitch, so I feel like I can just sum it up and then move on with this elevator pitch, but it's the most overexposed, generic beach set you've ever seen with the prettiest looking cast, like it's a goddamn CW Riverdale spinoff on a deserted island, and the acting is just as good or as bad. Same caliber.
Choose your words wisely.
Yeah, well, I was just making a joke there. And basically, they think they're on an island, but really they're in like some Matrix style, like red or blue pill, like we're under some mind control sci-fi stupid bullshit, and the story goes nowhere, and it's terrible. They spend a whole episode trying to figure out each other's names. It's funny, which is why I continued watching it to the end, because once I realized it wasn't serious, I was like, cool, well, I'm still entertained. So it did that. It entertained me. But to say there was anything redeeming about it is to say that, like, eating McDonald's 3 times a day is gonna, aid you in living a healthier and longer life. It's just not true. It's false. It's a fake statement. So that's where I stand.
Fake news right over here. So
yeah, check it out if you ever get the chance for a good laugh.
So my worst is a little bit interesting because I feel like there are a lot of other TV shows that I have that I would technically consider, like, on a scale, from a writing standpoint, from a lot of different factors, to be worse than what I have as my worst. I only got 2 episodes into Nicholas Winding Refn's Too Old to Die Young, or as he calls his extended movie, or whatever bullshit pretentious term he wanted to christen with that movie. And I feel like if I had somehow managed to summon up the willpower to watch all 10 episodes, each episode is an hour and a half of just dragging and meandering of, like, pretty imagery. And I feel like if I managed to have the willpower to get through all 10 episodes of that, I would have that as my least favorite. But for right now, I will say that my least favorite show of 2019 is the last season of Game of Thrones. Now, that's a little bit of a generic choice, I will say. I know it's a lot of people's least favorite, and they're like, and I can already hear the complaints. Oh, why are you shitting on the whole season when it's really just the finale? The finale is my least favorite episode, but I'd say the worst episode of that season is easily episode 4, The Last of the Starks, where they're just like cramming like 15 different bits of exposition down your throat. But I would just say that the reason why, and taking aside all the production stuff, all the bad writing stuff, and there was a lot of bad writing this season, just rewatching it, it's like, I'll tell you what it was. It was not the fact that it was just an overall bad season of television, which it was. It was the fact that it had so many interesting ideas. Like, we're talking about a show that was constantly able to one-up itself with each preceding season. And that's something that, again, is one of many, many different things that made Game of Thrones as special as it was. But what killed me is the fact of these guys went out of their way to not only introduce one of the most fascinating plot elements ever with the turn of Daenerys, but to do it in such a rushed, half-baked way that once again showed their hand for what it really is, which is that only to introduce it for shock value's sake. And for no other reason, not to add anything interesting, because they knew they had to wrap it up in the next episode. It's like, it was just the ultimate sign of just done giving a fuck. And it's the same thing that I'm going to attribute to the DC movies, which is where it's one thing when behind-the-scenes production problems are a thing. We all know it. Everyone who is on the internet knows that that's a thing. But it's when it's so blatantly obvious in the final product. That being Batman vs. Superman, Suicide Squad, Rise of Skywalker, Justice League, to name a few examples. When it's the behind-the-scenes problems are so goddamn obvious in the final product, that to me is the sign of a truly bad season of a TV show. And we're talking about a show that I hailed as the defining show of the decade. Like, I think
they can still be both, though.
Yeah, I would still hail this show as being the defining show of the decade. Like, just objectively speaking.
Yeah, but before we jump into it, the honorable mentions, I do have to say two things. I think that just because you're not a big Starbucks fan, and we know that Starbucks catered the last season of Game of Thrones, doesn't mean you have to put it down that hard. And no, seriously, dude. I mean, like, I get it. You have an aversion for coffee. It's fine.
I don't drink coffee. I think caffeine jitters.
I'm just trying to give you a tip as like critic to critic, you know? And then the other thing is, man, it's just like, I mean, come on, dude. Who didn't love the whole scene of them sitting around the fireplace and talking for 15 minutes before something happened?
What I'll give you is that scene is legitimately might be one of my favorite Game of Thrones moments ever. I have rewatched the Long Night episode probably more times than I've rewatched any individual episode of television.
But there really wasn't any other season of TV that was worse than that.
Nope.
Like,
not that I watch in its entirety.
It's, to tell you if it's in my top 10 or not, keep listening. But what I can say is that it certainly was not my worst show, as you just heard. The amount of problems
that I had with this show was not equaled by any other season of television that I watched in its entirety for this entire year. And don't get me wrong, there are definitely still a few stinkers that I have.
You can't blame the creative team. They were just in film school. Granted, it was the most expensive film school, as they've said many times, but this is literally a student production, as we've recently learned. So I think you're being too harsh on them.
The defining show of the decade was a goddamn fucking film school experiment. Oh my god!
What does that say about us, the people? What does that say about us, the people?
They actually admitted to it. I mean, what can you say from the Academy Award caliber writer of X-Men Origins Wolverine and Ender's Game, fucking taking over this project with his idiot friend who should be kissing his partner's feet that he has a goddamn job. But yeah.
Well,
I'm a guy who plays guitar.
I still love how Game of Thrones even managed to take up a chunk of this episode, considering how bad that last season was. That is a testament to the show's impact. Yeah. And with that being said, I'd love to move on to some shows that did have an impact on us, but just weren't able to make it into our top 10, but we would be remiss, and I hope I speak for both of us when I say we didn't bring them up right now.
Definitely.
Okay, so Dom, why don't you start us off with this one, then I'll back clean up on this.
Yeah, so like I said, I watched a decent amount of shows this year, like so much to the point where it's like half of them that didn't even make my honorable mentions. Like, it's just like really disappointing that they couldn't. Like, so just for a fun fact, so the third season of Stranger Things, if I'm getting that out of the way, I did not have that as an honorable mention.
Wow.
But I also wanted to give a shout out to a few things that didn't, real quick. His Dark Materials, the adaptation of the first book of Philip Pullman's trilogy that became the Golden Compass film in 2007. Not the best show, but I enjoyed it for what it was as an adaptation. The second season of Big Little Lies for a sequel to a miniseries that really was never warranted and was completely pointless in its existence. I thought it did a pretty good job. The fifth season of Black Mirror, those 3 episodes, I thought that season did not get enough credit for continuing the Black Mirror universe and mythos in its, in its continued examination of our society's obsession with technology. And also another show that just, I quite frankly don't think gets enough love in general is the second season of On My Block, which I think was a continuation of a very interesting and really funny, awesome kind of throwback to those like kind of teen shows. But the thing that I will constantly give this show credit for is not being afraid to go to those certain areas, especially considering the area where these characters live and grow up. So with that being said, let's get into some of my honorable mentions that I have. So I have as my honorable mentions, I'm just going to run through the list. I figure I have the first season of Living With Yourself, the third season of Young Justice Outsiders that premiered exclusively on DC Universe's platform as a throwback to one of my favorite shows growing up that was so unfairly canceled. I loved it, even if it did get a little bit cluttered with the amount of characters that it had.
It was a good one.
The first season of The Witcher, the final season of Silicon Valley, the third season of Glow, the third season of True Detective, aired all the way back in the beginning of this year, was the show that kicked off this year. And again, a breath of fresh air considering its return to form. An absolutely outstanding performance from Mahershala Ali. And the last of my honorable mentions is two more. Good Omens, which is the miniseries that was an adaptation of Neil Gaiman's book, starring David Tennant and Michael Sheen. Very underseen and not talked about enough. And then my last 2 honorable mentions, oh man, Chris is going to want to murder me once he finds this out, are the final season of Mr. Robot and the first season of The Righteous Gemstones on HBO. Righteous Gemstones was going to be in the top 10 until I saw 2 other shows that ended up knocking it out, and it was really difficult because let me tell you something, for as much as they shit the bed with that last season of Game of Thrones, HBO came to play with the amount of new debut shows that they have this year. And also just in terms of giving a shout out to Mr. Robot for a show that was largely marred by its sequel effort in 2016. I think the amount of love and care and passion that Sam Esmail continued to have for that world and those characters really showed, especially in this last season. I'm disappointed that we didn't get the 2 more seasons as opposed to 1, as Kyle Bradstreet told me at SUNY-Wide back in 2017. Kyle Bradstreet is an executive producer on the show, but for how this show managed to send off its world and its characters, I thought it did an absolutely beautiful, exceptional job.
Very cool. No, I'm a little surprised Mr. Robot's not in your top 10, but that must mean that some of the shows that you've been hyping up lately, which I will now not reveal, knowing that they will be in most likely in your top 10 of the year, must be worth a grain of the salt. So jumping in to my honorable mentions, I'm just gonna start off with a show that maybe had I had enough time to sort of simmer with and sit and think on, would have shot its way into my top 10 list, but also maybe not, because for as good as it was also really corny and kind of stupid. The Witcher. I'm curious to see where this one goes. Clearly, it is not the Game of Thrones killer, as Game of Thrones we saw killed itself, but it was still a good watch nonetheless. I'm going to throw an animated one in the hat here. Castlevania is a Netflix adaptation of a classic video game series, and I'd never played the video game series, but the show's delightful, the voice acting's great, the animation is almost like an entire homage to Disney's Gargoyles, a show that I very much so enjoyed as a little kid, but with that crisp, modern touch of a hand-drawn animated show. So that one's really worth watching if you're feeling something a little silly in the line of vampires trying to take over humanity. And it's good, though. It's good. Silicon Valley, you've heard our episode on it. Unfortunately, wasn't as good enough to land in the top 10, but it was still nonetheless a return to form, and you love to see that as a show with such a tainted history exits the stage. This show, Black Earth Rising, is a John Goodman Netflix original series. It is a very historical-based show. I watched the show with my mom. We were constantly pausing and looking up information. It takes place essentially about like Hotel Rwanda and all of that type of stuff in the 90s, and it's very deconstructionist, and it's just it kind of opens your eyes up to like there's more than just the city, the town, the county you live in, and not that we don't know that, but sometimes you need a little slap in the face in a nice way that isn't like super left or right leaning. It was just like a good eye opener. And before we jump into our top 10 list, the last show that I have on my honorable mentions, which was actually on the lower part of my top 10 until my number 9 slot, which I will not reveal, booted it out so quickly and so aggressively, was Netflix's Atypical. That is a great show. It's one of those heartwarming sitcoms, but it's got that modern twist that sort of takes the old formula that we know and love and spins it and adds a little something else on it. And so I don't want to spoil anything about that show because I fear that I can't talk about it without ruining it. It's just so interwoven in such a subtle way that like it's one of those things where when I was watching Lost for the first time, it's like suddenly you have that moment where you're like, oh shit, I'm in this now. And speaking of what we're now in, that's our top 10 list of 2019. We're going to go back and forth just so you guys know from 10 to 10. I just spoke a lot.
9 to 9, 8 to 8, 7 to 7, and so on.
And so on. And so since I just spoke a lot, we're going to have Dom start this one off if he would do me the honor.
I hope you're ready to not punch me in the face because I can already smell that you're going to have a disagreement with my choices. So here's the thing about a top 10 list. There's a lot of different factors that can go into it. You know, it's always tricky when, you know, you have to compare personal enjoyment to obviously influence and what it is, all of the different presiding factors that go into the show. So with that being said, my number 10 choice, let's just get it out of the way. Let's rip this fucking Band-Aid off. My number 10 choice is The Mandalorian.
You're kidding me.
I'm not kidding. Not at all. Trust me, it was very difficult. It was very, very difficult. But at the end of the day, I'll make this one quick so we don't have to talk about it because we've already talked twice
a lot. We have
about the first episode.
It makes for good conversation. It makes for good podcast.
Most definitely. So the thing that I enjoyed about it is that, look, it's no secret that we were both very dissatisfied with how this new trilogy ended and just overall how Disney has been kind of playing us for saps with these last couple of movies. But what I like is that even though I would say it had it fell into a few rough patches, specifically with those middle couple of episodes and trying to figure out what its own identity was. What I appreciate it for is a few things. Number one, simplicity, you know? I feel like first off, it's not the type of show that needs to hammer you over the head with a ton of references. It kind of throws you back into the Star Wars mythos in a new era that you haven't explored, while also kind of making you kind of like rekindling what it is that you fell in love with in Star Wars originally. Kind of in a way, I would say being the most faithful to George Lucas's original vision, which is that it's just a Western in space. It's just a Western in space. That's literally it. No Jedi, no mythos, no nothing. They tap into that a little bit, you know? With, obviously, the Baby Yoda thing. Until we actually have a fucking name for it, I'm going to keep calling it Baby Yoda. Suck it, Jon Favreau. But,
does he get mad about that?
No, literally, when Bob Iger emailed him calling it Baby Yoda, Favreau, like, apparently got really pissed off and told him, it's not Baby Yoda! It's not Baby Yoda!
Fuck him, get over it.
I was about to say,
Name
hey,
it
guess
then,
what?
idiot.
The internet christened it, therefore it is such.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just, this show just, like, gave me something that, for me, I had not gotten from the movies of Star Wars since Rogue One, which is something new in the Star Wars universe. To me, this show was doing what Star Wars should have been doing in the first place, which is utilizing the TV scope and how the TV scope had been changing and expanding to further the Star Wars mythos, you know, rather than just relying on the movies to be just these giant events. It's okay to have the movies as giant events, but with nothing to back it up and no sort of context. That, you know, that they were never going to be as special as they could be. And I feel like this show, with it being simple, a simple character focus, the fact that you were this invested in a character who for the majority of the show's run, you don't even see his goddamn face. You're only seeing his voice, you know? I understand, like, a lot of the complaints with how the sets are limited, but to me, at least, I feel like this was a show that, for everything that it could have been, I was very, very impressed with. And to me, at least, this was Star Wars Reborn, something that the Force Awakens kind of tricked me into a little bit. So that's why I have The Mandalorian there. Again, a little bit of blinders on, you can tell. But like I said, I'm not going to shit on something just because the studio that produces it is evil. Because guess what? Favreau and Filoni, they know what they're doing with Star Wars. And I really hope Filoni takes over once Kathleen Kennedy leaves Lucasfilm.
Gotcha. All right. Well, I feel like the best way to not give them any more of a mention is just to move on. So if you want to hear why The Mandalorian sucks, we have 2 episodes about that, and I will gladly encourage you to go back and listen to me break it down and ruin your illusion for you all out there. But you know what, Dom? I respect your top 10 list, and I think it's very brave putting that on there. So at least from critic to critic, I think I can see why you said it.
Like I said, if the next couple of seasons end up sucking, then I will give the show I will shit on the show as it is needed. But right now, for this first season, I enjoyed it.
And that's a great way to really summarize how I feel about my top 10 show. It's in its second season, and the second season was even more of a whirlwind than the first one. I'm going to give...
Your number 10, you mean?
Yeah. Yes. My number 10 spot, I'm going to give it to Amazon's Jack Ryan. God damn, did I ever think... I always wondered what Jim Halpert did when he was, not in the office. And it makes sense now. No wonder he was...
Also, when he's not filming A Quiet Place.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, dude, he is just a badass in this show. Like, he's one of those guys, and I feel like everyone in, like, that show, they have to worry about, like, will I be getting cast in other shows because of how iconic I became as this one role for so long. And you know what? When you're watching this show, you don't see him as Jim. You see him as Jack Ryan, and it's incredible. And the show is one of those very generic style Homeland, House of Card, political thrillers at the surface, but once you get into it and you realize that Amazon made essentially a spy movie broken up into 10 episodes or 8 episodes a season, then you're in for a wild ride. Some of the dialogue's corny, some of the action you've seen before, but you know what? They're doing it so big on television that it feels like a goddamn mini movie each week, and because of that, I gotta say that this show, Jack Ryan, earns my top 10 spot because it is fun, it is entertaining,
Number 10.
And most importantly, it's different for television. It's different than the other shows in this genre I've seen. It does things on a bigger and far grander scale, and I respect them for taking those risks. It's paying off. So,
really?
yeah,
Right.
I like Jack Ryan.
After that glowing recommendation, I might actually have to watch this show
I'm a
now.
fan.
Yeah,
I'm a fan.
I think the last Amazon original that I watched that wasn't a miniseries was Homecoming, which again another show that talked about veterans with Julia Roberts and Stefan James, fucking pretentious hack. Just say it's Steven. It's pronounced Steven. But anyways, so my number 9 actually bouncing, keeping it on the Amazon train is I would say probably their most groundbreaking original show of this year, which is The Boys. Not the first alternative superhero show that will be on this list, but kind of the first. The next in a long line of subversive superhero properties that came out this year. The thing that I enjoyed so much about the show is that, obviously, besides the fact of it's rated R, it's very entertaining, kind of pulling the curtain back on superheroes, who they really are as people. Obviously, it's statements on corporatization, utilizing these capes in order to blindside us with such iconography that we don't even question the actual things that they're doing, allowing for them to completely, basically do what they want, unhinged, unchecked. And wow, when did I start talking about Disney? Jesus Christ. But yeah, so
well done.
I would say the only reason why this show is as low on my list at number 9 is because I feel like the show kind of unintentionally, in a way, makes its main villain, the Superman-esque character Homelander, more interesting to me than any of the heroes that we're supposed to be rooting for. As much as I enjoy the cast, and I have to give a shout out to all the cast members, Carl Urban, Jack Quaid, Tomer Capone, Laz Alonso, Anthony Starr, Dominic McGilligan, like all these TV names that we've been seeing pop up in the last couple of years. My problem is that I feel like the main characters, the heroes that we're following, the boys, they kind of fall into those type characteristics, and I feel like the writing for them gets a little bit cliche, and it kind of takes away from something that should be really, really interesting, Like, I'm sorry, but when the actual superheroes who are revealed to kind of be the villains, to me, are more interesting than our main characters, that's a little bit of a problem. Now, I don't fault the show too much for that, because, again, it helps compound it into its own very unique identity, and it kind of goes along with what Point Grey is trying to accomplish with this show. But overall, yeah, The Boys, and a very exceptional superhero property this year. Can't wait to see what they do with season 2, because, oh man, you want to talk about cliffhanger endings. Oh man, without spoiling anything, this cliffhanger ending kind of takes the cake. So that's my number 9, The Boys.
Yeah, I don't really have much to say about that at the moment. With
At the
that
moment.
being said, I'm going to move into my number 9, which is, Dom, I'd love for you to take a guess at this one, knowing that it's
God.
that Canadian show I was
Oh, it
talking
is?
about. That
It's
tricky
Schitt's
little-
Creek. It's
no,
Schitt's Creek.
it is not.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
It's not?
I've not seen that show. It is actually a show called Kim's Convenience.
Oh, you motherfucker, you fooled me.
What
You
Kim's
fooled
Convenience
me.
is, aside from being a ride, is an adaptation of a play of the same name, Kim's Convenience, about a Korean family who immigrates to Toronto, Canada, or as the locals say, Toronto. Trust me, I'm cultured, I know. I just have to put my little American spin on it for all of you out there. Just to show you that there's a reason Jack Ryan's in my number 10. America. No, I'm just kidding. Anyways, with that being said, this show does something so well, and that is that it doesn't do anything different than we've seen before. But what it does is it takes that typical sitcom formula, the first generation youth, the immigrant family, and just throws them into our society. It throws them into smartphones. It throws them into dating. It throws them into the girl fighting off traditional marriage, her parents trying to pair her off. She just wants to find love on her own. It throws them into this family who has their firstborn child come over, get arrested, has a bit of a troubled past, and is sort of reformed, and how much of a stain that is on their traditional immigrant family. And it just challenges them in today's modern society. And it's a nice, refreshing look at something that does happen a lot that we don't really hear about, because when do we really focus on like the Korean story, the Korean immigration, and through sitcom and comedy, that's such a great way to explore like other cultures' sort of immigration. And I appreciate it for that, and just the wacky, haphazard zaniness that just occurs throughout the entirety of the show. It's a ride. I laugh out loud throughout the entirety of that show, which I like a lot of comedies, and I like them for many reasons, but it's rare that I laugh out loud on like pretty much almost every episode. So number 9 for me is Kim's Convenience.
Oh, man, you completely
on
tricked
Netflix.
me. I thought that you were talking about Schitt's Creek, and that's partly on me.
I'm glad I was able to pull one over on you. You pretty much guessed it
Hey, in a
all.
way, I kind of fooled you because you didn't think I was going to put the Mandalorian on my number 10. No, but
I
yeah,
didn't.
No, it's really tricky, especially to get that zany humor, especially with how like modern day audiences kind of talk down on it. Even though like every single one of them, like we all grew up with Disney Channel, we all had that zany, ridiculous humor that we like to think is shitty, but we still grew up and then we still laughed at it. Talking about segues, because we're actually my number 8 is probably the only kids program that I would say I have on here. And it honestly kind of kills me that this is kind of being shunted to the side, being shunted as animation, as kids programming, because to me, this was probably, don't get me wrong, the thing that I like about 2019 is that after Game of Thrones finished, 2019, specifically with Netflix, really tried to go into it with like this grand fantasy. And even if not all of it worked all the time, I just do have to give them credit for trying. But I'll tell you this much, is that fucking puppets, man. Because my number 8 is The Dark Crystal, Age of Resistance.
I was wondering where that would be. You talked about it a lot.
Fucking love this show. Now, I know that there are going to be a lot of Dark Crystal purists out there that are going to be pissed. That's just like, oh, this wasn't nearly good. But
well, you did your homework though. You watched the movie
I did
too.
my homework. I watched the movie. I got a little bit familiar with the lore, so I was basically, what's it called? I was well informed, on the lore, like, of the planet of Ra, the Skeksis and the Mystics and all that good stuff, the Gelflings. And let me tell you something, is that for a 10-episode prequel series, speaking of which, also, you want to talk about a Marvel, the director of all these 10 episodes was Louis Leterrier, and if that name doesn't ring a bell to you guys, that's the director of The Incredible Hulk, starring Edward Norton, and the first Clash of the Titans movie. He directed all 10 episodes of this show, and the direction is very good, but obviously the props go to the Jim Henson department. Jim Henson's daughter, I believe her name is Lisa, continuing the amazing world that are one of the many amazing worlds that her father crafted. What's it called? But the thing that I like so much is about this show is, besides speaking to the inner kid in all of us, besides just being one of the few shows to craft a world, to craft an experience. I talk a lot about world building and how that's something that seems to be going by the wayside with a lot of our media. But the thing that I really liked about it is that it brought back that sense of magic while also still managing to throw in a lot of dark stuff. It continues what it is that Henson made so good, which is mixing the kind of the lighter kiddie fare with, some of the darker subject matter. Like the guy who I was watching this with when I watched the first episode of this over the summer, even he was impressed. And he's like not a guy that watches a lot of kids programs. And that just speaks to the power of this show, And so, obviously, you know, tremendous voice cast, a lot of characters, there's a lot going on, there's a big mythos, and obviously it's not for the faint of heart. You know, if you don't feel like kind of really getting invested in this, I would say it's not worth your time. But for somebody like me, who that kind of fantasy is my shit, I love those types of worlds that you could just get invested in with all the little creatures, you know, for me, it was probably the closest to Lord of the Rings that I've gotten since Lord of the Rings, and it's with motherfucking puppets. So that's why Dark Crystal makes its place on as my number 8.
Wow. With that being said, I'm going to bring it back to childhood as well for number 8 in a bit of a different way. This was a movie that I had skimmed on when I was a little kid, and I remember liking it. It didn't quite resonate with me as much as, like, my parents did their job, right? So they had me watch Rocky, they had me watch Star Wars, they had me watch Goodfellas, all these classic movies when I was a little kid. They sat me down and they were like, you need to watch these films. And I remember hearing my friends, like, play outside on our old house in the Bronx on their scooters, just, like, scooting up and down. And at first I was always bummed. I was like, damn it, I want to be outside and playing right now. But then I realized, oh, these movies are important. And one of those movies that I watched was a little movie called The Karate Kid. And so when I found out that on YouTube was a TV show that was a smash hit that no one seemed to be talking about, of course, curiosity had sparked my interest. And so I had to watch this show. And okay, it's a web series. I recognize that it isn't the best shot show. I recognize that it isn't the most artistic show on my list. But you know what it did? I binged this show in 2 days. I didn't do only those things in 2 days, but it was so good that I made time to binge 2 entire seasons of this show in 2 days, and no other show on my list pulled me in. So that's what this show did. It pulled me in. It made me feel like a little 8-year-old again, discovering some classic 80s films in a completely new light. And for that, I can't give it enough credit. And so
funny, I actually don't think you actually said the name of it yet.
I was waiting. My number 8 spot is Cobra Kai. YouTube's Cobra Kai.
YouTube Reds, Cobra Kai. Oh, man, wow.
Yeah, it was a great show, dude.
Yeah,
amazing.
No, and you talked to me a lot about the show. This is one of the few shows that you were ranting and raving a little bit about over the summer, and I want to get to it. I am going to get to it at some point. It's just a matter of, for me, I don't know what it is. The Karate Kid was just never one of those movies that spoke to me, you know? Like, and don't get me wrong, like, a lot of those movies, like, I would get into, but that was just one of those movies where I'm like, I get it, it's cool, but there was just something missing for me there, you know?
There's a lot of movies, man. I get it.
There is. It's a lot of movies. So, moving up the list. So, I would say that the other thing that 2019 did excellently, there were 2 things that I think 2019 did excellently when it comes to TV. Number 1 is subversive superhero shows. You know, I talked a little bit about that with The Boys. The other thing I think they did excellently is sophomore efforts that followed up an already terrific first season. So, David Fincher's Mindhunter, which aired in 2017, was already one of the most groundbreaking and interesting shows that I've ever seen. Kind of looking behind the curtain, not only at typical police procedurals, you know, and first off, being the first police procedural that actually got me invested for the first time in years, but also being the first of many properties I feel like that would start to tap into the deep, dark mind of serial killers. And so when I found out after a year of waiting, I'm still pissed when Netflix takes 2 years, or when shows take 2 years to come back as opposed to 1, but I usually find that it makes the waiting pay off, because let me tell you something, season 2 of Mindhunter came out like right around my birthday, proved to be equally as fascinating, equally as interesting, equally as subversive when it comes to those types of character types, and also just continuing to expand upon the lore and when it comes to the dark underbelly of the criminally insane in this country. And I'll tell you the number 1 thing that this season did, besides continuing the overall trajectory of what I liked so much about the first season, which is kind of exploring the 3 main leads, that being Jonathan Groff's Holden, Holt McElhaney's Bill, and Anna Torv's Wendy, to the point with their personal lives and their obsession with their work and their own little nicks, to the point where literally you are unsure of whether or not you're watching serial killers or FBI agents. Like that is how good this show is. You literally cannot tell the difference between the 2 sides. But what I like that this season did that took it a step further is, besides taking them off the hunt of just interviewing the individual serial killers and actually having a case to solve, with having to solve the Atlanta murders of the early 80s, is that this show did something very fascinating, which is kind of tapping into the origin of serial killers. Now, I know that sounds a little bit like counterintuitive, because considering the fact that the entire premise of the show is trying to figure out the origin, like what causes serial killers. But when they reveal what goes down with Bill's son, his adopted son, I should say. I won't spoil what it is, but when they reveal what happens with this show, that made it already takes Bill and makes him an even more fascinating character. And I like how this season kind of does a flip where the first season was focused on Holden. This season is mostly focused on Bill. But what they do with his son in this season, oh my God, it's unbelievable. And David Fincher said that he was going to do 5 seasons of this show. God damn it, I want fucking 8 seasons of this show. Oh man, it was so goddamn good. So that is why. So 2019, I don't think we got as much serial killer content, but for this show being as special and as excellent as it was and continuing everything that I loved about the first season so much, that is why Mindhunter Season 2 is my number 7.
Okay, well, I'll have to check that show out. I'll admit I haven't seen it yet. There's just so much to watch, but
there's a lot. And that's what I like about it, is that so far, I don't think we've had like a single show on here that we've shared. Like, they've all been very different and unique.
Yeah, yet. I mean, you know, spoiler free, I can't speak any more to that. But one thing I can speak to is my number 7, which is Stranger Things Season 3. I was talking a bit earlier about, you know, returning to form and specifically Silicon Valley, and god damn it, if this show didn't save itself, I could have cared less about this season until you forced me to watch it, as I said on one of the first episodes of this show, so there's no reason to go down that trail. But what I can say that I have in common with from when I watched this show the first time is I can't wait for the next season. And when the news just broke that we won't be getting Stranger Things Season 4 in 2020, well, Season 3 did such a good job that I am upset. I wish we were getting more Stranger Things next year because that's how good Season 3 was. So I guess I'll just have to go back and rewatch Seasons 1 and 3 until the new season comes out in 2021, because god damn it, if I've watched a lot of Olympics and I've watched a lot of sports and I have not seen a recovery this impressive. So Stranger Things Season 3 is rolling in at number 7.
Well, I'm glad that you give that show credit for us. See, what you call is taking a few steps forward, I call taking like 3 steps back. I don't
remember.
hate Stranger Things Season 3, but this was definitely the season where everyone kind of called this season. This was the season for me that was really starting to show the repetitive nature of the show that kind of everyone afflicted with Season 2. I actually enjoy Season 2 a lot. I think it's really subversive in a lot of different ways. But this isn't the Stranger Things podcast. This is the top 10 TV shows.
Spoilers,
podcast.
There will be more Stranger Things podcasts.
Yes, there
just
will.
not right
most
now.
Definitely. But so if we're moving on to the number 6 spot, the last one before we break into the top 5 of the show. So number 6, again, this is where we really get into some tough spots because there were some really great limited seasons this year. You know, the kind of bookending extended movies, you know, ranging from like 4 to 5 episodes. And it was kind of a toss-up because what I have at number 6 is the show that I thought should have won the Emmy. You know, and that is Ava DuVernay's When They See Us. Premiered, literally snuck in right at the end of Emmy voting season this year, literally dropped on May 31st. And you watch the trailer for this and you think, oh no, this is just going to be another political show covering, the trites and horrors that black people have endured in this country. And like I said, this is not a political show, and I don't want to get too much into that. But I think that these types of properties continue to impress with me is how they never cease to not only be relevant, but constantly introducing a new facet of the horrors that African Americans have had to endure in this country. And I had so we talked a little bit on the Watchmen episode about the Tulsa riots in 1921, which is an event that we had no knowledge of. I have never even heard of the Central Park 5 case. And after watching this show, I was already in like a depressed mood that day, but watching that show, and I had to get all 4 episodes over with in one day because it's just so compelling. The subject matter is so gripping. It's so well shot, and it's so it's so heart-wrenching once you see it, because again, the thing that I'm going to attribute this one to, and the kind of unique new facet that the show introduced into these types of struggles, is that it's very similar to what Jojo Rabbit did, which is where these are kids. These are literal fucking kids, you know? We saw Do the Right Thing, you know? We've seen, we watched Straight Outta Compton, which talked a little bit about the Rodney King incident, you know? I watched Queen and Slim earlier this year, which I thought was another interesting take on it, but this one, again, it was the first time where I'd seen this sort of thing happen to kids, where you have these 5 teenagers who all it is wrong place, wrong time, in an era that is very fueled against them. And you see them having to be subjected to the horrors of the legal system and the criminal justice system, to the point where it's like, It literally takes every fiber of your being to be able to sit through this show and not have any, like, literally, if you don't have an emotional response to this show, then you're just simply not human, you know? And it really sucks that we only get the kid actors for 2 episodes because they move very quickly on. Because, again, I think the only criticism that I would lobby in this show is I wanted kind of one more episode because they kind of do rush into showing them as adults once they are eventually released from jail. But it all is wrapped up in that pitch perfect 4th episode, which almost works as an independent film in and of its own, where you're following the one of the 5, Corey, played brilliantly by Jarrell Jerome in one of the most gut-wrenching performances because he's the one that easily endured the worst out of the 5 of them. And the show takes a very interesting turn in that where it recasts all of the younger kids with adult actors. They keep Jarrell Jerome for the rest of the show as they show what happens to him once he goes through the legal criminal system. And at first I was a little bit thrown off with it because obviously you're seeing 20-something year old Jerome compared to 30 and 40-year-olds who play the rest of the other 4. And yeah, it's just, I don't even know how to describe it. I'm literally lost for words. That's how compelling.
Just a ride, huh?
Yeah, a ride, but one of the worst possible rides. Literally, there are rides that you never want to get off of, and then there's rides that when you get off of, you're like, holy fuck, thank God that's over. I got a lot from it, but thank fucking God that shit's over. Oh my God. And another interstellar cast from both the adults and the kids. I want to give a shout out to all of the kid actors, but unfortunately they were still too fresh and too new, so I don't remember their names off the top of my head. The only one that I know is Asante Black, who, if I'm not mistaken, was the one who played the younger version of Kevin. But all the adult actors, John Leguizamo, Michael K. Williams, even Felicity Huffman, as a trash human being as she is in real life, as she is in this show, because the weird thing is I think that her criminal confession came out literally at the exact same time as the show came out, so you want to talk about timing. Vera Farmiga, Anjanae Ellis, Marsha Stephanie Blake, the list goes on and on and on, but I can't say enough about this show, and that is why When They See Us makes my number 6. God damn it, I wish it was higher.
Cool. No, I mean, hey man, I'll have to check it out. Now, my number 6, my number 6 is a show that, it started off very, very slow, but in a good way. And then it just sucks you in, and it's like when you in a movie you pull the pin out of the there's always the room comes underwater, and then you pull the cork, and then everything starts spinning and swirling, and it goes faster and faster and faster until you just impact, and just everything is just splattered all over the place. And that show is Russian Doll. Great show. Natasha Lyonne is incredible, plays this amazing New Yorker who just takes no shit, and she's just awesome, and the whole show's just awesome. It does tell you that you can teach an old dog new tricks, right? We've seen the Groundhog's Day formula time and time again, but this was a quite a different application, at least for what I've seen from this sort of Freaky Friday-esque style of show, and I hope it gets another season. I don't know if they've determined that yet. I've heard talks of them just capping it out at a limited series, which I think would also serve the legacy of the show, but it's just so good that I would rather see them try their hand at another season just to selfishly get more than preserve its legacy. That's how good this show is, folks. So without any more, spoilers or anything, I just want to say, if you want something that's freaky, that also makes you happy and sad at the same time, and gives you that sort of what the fuck feeling, what did I just watch? Check out Russian Doll on Netflix.
Most definitely. I'm not going to talk too much about that because I watched one episode of it. I do want to eventually get back to it because I don't think watching one episode of a show is ever enough to give it credit, when it comes to critiquing. But so if we're moving on, we're in the top 5 now. The top 5 spots. So my number 5. So continuing off of the Mindhunter theme of outstanding sophomore efforts to shows that came out previously. So this was a show that I saw some trailers for back in 2018. I don't remember what the show that I was watching at the time was, but I was watching it in 2018, and I was looking at the trailers. I'm like, this looks good, but I don't know. It feels a little bit too derivative of other stuff that I've seen before. And so I didn't watch the first season at all. Then the second season came out, and my buddy watched it and was like, dude, you have to fucking watch this show. And I'm like, and I watched the first episode, and I'm like, this is good, but I don't know if I'm going to be able to get into it. And as I continued to watch it, I was like, oh no, the show's fucking brilliant. And as the show that I feel like, again, it's really tricky to discuss, or really if any show will be able to fulfill the legacy that Game of Thrones left, because it was just such that type of a show, that type of once-in-a-lifetime shows. But let me tell you something, that I'll be damned if the family dynamics in Succession don't rival the dynamics of amongst many of the royal families in Game of Thrones, because this fucking show, oh man, you want to talk about a show that toes the line between comedy and tragedy. It's some of the most brutally hysterical and just gut-wrenchingly awful things to watch. So it's a show that's kind of based remotely on the Murdoch family, the family that opened and is behind 20th Century Fox. But this show, I feel like, is so much more than that. It is Shakespearean at its best and at its worst. The dynamics between the different children and how they each relate to their absolutely despicable patriarch of the family, played by Brian Cox in the role that he was born to play. I'm so glad that after years of character acting, Cox finally has a leading man role that is worthy of his goddamn talents. But he's not the only person that this should talk about on the show. Jeremy Strong's performance as Kendall on this show is one for the ages, but
yeah, he's great.
It's another one of those shows that, again, it's you start following the lead characters, but you are in it for that goddamn ensemble, because, oh man, I don't even know which of the characters to talk about, because every single member of this cast contributes something new and interesting and unique. And again, the show, I talked about it a little bit before, but the show's brilliant in it being able to toe the line between tragedy and comedy, because you're laughing so hard, but the show is always reminding you of just like what despicable people they are, while still keeping it funny. And then it'll just throw in that one little thing that makes you go, oh, fuck. Like, legitimately. And again, coming off of season 1, that finale for season 1 was already gangbusters enough, but what they do in season 2, I wouldn't want to spoil anything, but
yeah, no
all
spoilers.
I'm
halfway through the first season.
All I'm going to say is bore on the floor. Bore on the floor. That's all I'm going to say, and everyone who watched this second season will know exactly what I'm talking about. This is one where if I had to recommend one show from HBO for you guys to watch, and there's a lot to watch, but if I had to recommend one, if you want like a show to keep up with and not a miniseries that's like capped off beginning to end, it would absolutely be Succession, my number 5.
Wow. So speaking of second seasons and incredible, comeback efforts after we had an amazing first season, I'm going to go with my number 5 show, which is the second season of It's the End of the Fucking World on Netflix. This is a brilliant show. It's an English show. It's very dark. It's very satirical, but it's also very emotional, and it's just one of those shows that it's okay. So I'm one of those guys that I like to I like to keep my comedy and I like to keep my drama a little bit separate for the most part, because I usually find that sometimes and most times that gets messy, at least to my taste. But this show can make you laugh and then 5 minutes later have you almost crying, and you're just like, more of both of that. So the ability of this show to do that, also in a show that the average runtime of an episode is 17 minutes, is brilliant. It's peak filmmaking, it's cutting the fat, it's giving you the exact amount of everything that you need, with such an incredibly young cast who I think are all going to go on to do great things. And also, if you watch the first season, like me, you probably thought, selfishly, as I say with Russian Doll, of course I'd love another season, but how do you do that based off the way that the first season concluded? And what I will say is, I would never have guessed in a million years how to write that second season, but god damn it, am I glad we got it. Because this show, the brilliance of this show, is underrated, at least in America. I don't know the impact of the show in England, where it airs on the BBC, and of course Netflix. We get it packaged to us over here through Netflix, but even if it is a hit over there, it's not being watched enough. This is just one of those shows that you need to watch. And so with that being said, It's the End of the Fucking World is my number 5 show, and I'm very excited to hear about my friend Dom's number 4 show.
Definitely. So again, I'm so mad because literally every single one of these shows that you've brought up on your list is either shows that, like, I'm actually really impressed. Like, it's a lot of shows that, like, I really do want to watch and want to get to. It's just a matter of time, and there's so much fucking content. But again,
I'm right there with you.
That just speaks to, like, the overall diversity of content that there is. So my number 4. So it's a little bit interesting about number 4 and 3, because I don't usually like to play catch up when it comes to certain things, but I do also understand that playing catch up when it comes to certain shows and movies is just a necessary tool to trade. You're not going to hit everything in the moment when it comes out. It's a lot of content. A lot of stuff happening, obviously, in real life, so you're just not going to catch some shows. So my next two, I'll give a little bit of a foreshadowing for my number 3 as well. My next two were shows that I watched a little bit last minute, but I was very blessed because they're both mini-series, and so I was able to get them over with relatively quickly. But this show, my number 4, I actually literally just finished like 2 nights ago. So kind of speaking to your previous effort where you may not have had enough time to sit and marinate on it, this show was one of the shows where I didn't need any fucking time to marinate on it because I've talked a little bit about, our own political beliefs and, kind of the overall influence of what actually defines politics versus what is just lampshading us into just blatantly believing something. And let me tell you something. I know that movie Bombshell is out in theaters right now about the women of Fox News who sued Roger Ailes. And I'm sure that movie's good in its own right. But let me fucking tell you something. I already know it ain't gonna have shit on the loudest voice. Based off the loudest voice in the room, developed by Tom McCarthy, produced by Blumhouse, of all things, in conjunction with Showtime. Taking aside Russell Crowe's impeccable performance. Like, I really like how Russell Crowe, now that like he's kind of out of the light of leading man status, he's gone a lot more character actor status, which I think is is what suits him. Like he's put on a little bit of weight in more recent years, but he still proves time and time again that he is just an incredible actor. And again, it's another one of those performances that just shines through the fat suit completely, like you believe that you are watching Roger Ailes. But I'll tell you what the most compelling part about this is that I actually really like that Blumhouse shot this because there are certain scenes where you feel like you're watching a horror movie. And that absolutely is how you should feel, You can call it for how it is for, trying to blatantly make you feel a certain way. But there's also just the fact of, no, this is what happened. And this is the shit that happened. And so I feel like portraying it in the horror setting that it is really, I feel like this is the show that the Me Too movement needed and would have given it a lot more validation because for once, you're finally seeing something in your media where, with how these women are treated in this type of a hostile work environment that actually gives them validity. And doesn't feel like it's just them trying to say something in order to get attention for themselves. Like, for once, I feel like I'm just watching them in a real work environment actually get some goddamn validity for the absolute shame that they got. And the other interesting thing that the show does is that it explores all different types of, of these types of characters, with his assistant and how she wants to be him, and his wife, who is just so comfortable in her position of power as the queen that she just doesn't want to do that she will just blatantly believe all of his lies and bullshit, even as he gets more and more paranoid. And then obviously with Gretchen Carlson, portrayed brilliantly by Naomi Watts, as the first of these women to actually fight back against his control. But even with the amount of shit that she knew that she was going into, but she knew she had to do it because there was no other way to solve this. The Annabelle Wallace character, all of them. This is probably the first Seth MacFarlane performance that I've seen that actually tells me, holy shit, this guy's actually a real fucking actor. But at the end of the day, the most compelling thing about this show is showing Fox News' influence on the media landscape. And this gave me so much perspective on shit that I've lived through. Literally looking back and seeing kind of the other side of the coin, the other side of the window on 9/11, on the 2008 Obama election, on the 2012 election, on Trump and, his kind of rise to power, and then leading all the way up to the Me Too movement. And it's all anchored in this incredible performance. And I'll tell you the thing that gets me through this with Crowe as Ailes is that as despicable as he is, they still humanize him, and you still understand, and you almost kind of root for him in a way. Because as full of shit as he is, and the thing that the show does very brilliantly is it pulls back the layers and shows how full of shit that he is, it still almost fools you into thinking that he actually sees something in these women, And so it's so goddamn compelling. It's one of the shows that not enough people are talking about. I would say that of all the shows to watch that are important, I would say this is probably one of the most goddamn important shows that you could say. So that's my number 4, The Loudest Voice.
Amazing. Now, speaking of shows where there's a character in the show who, has to be around a lot of women, in this situation, the show I'm talking about, this character does see a lot in these women. So much so that he almost loses himself fighting for them. And this show is Glow, and I'm talking about Mark Maron's character, because the way he goes to bat for the gorgeous ladies of wrestling time and time again in this series is incredible. It is such a large cast, yet you feel so focused and so in tune, and I think that's a huge testament to the writing, because the way that they managed to give you the personality of what is there, something like odd like 10, 12 different wrestlers, and you feel that you know each of them as if you were watching a 3-hour wrestling special each week. You know, you get their on-stage persona, and you also get their off-stage persona, and the way that they're able to really manage such a large cast and such a crazy endeavor, it blows my mind every time I watch this show. I'm actually, like my fall asleep show right now is going back and rewatching this show, and I'm starting to even see the magic again a second time, like how well crafted this show is. And that show really, to me, stems from Mark Maron and Alison Brie's characters. Their dynamic is delightful. It is everything you want. But what this show also offers, which other dramas don't, is a little bit of action and a little bit of comedy and all the right beats. So with that being said, my number 4 show is Glow. Please watch it if you haven't. Get caught up, because we're going to be doing an episode on that 4th season when it drops sometime this year.
Fourth and final season. And hell fucking yeah.
Final. Yeah, so with that being said.
It's always difficult for me for Glow, because I don't know what it is about that show, but for some reason, every time it comes out, I never watch it when it comes out, and I always let it stew for a few months. I'm like, oh, when am I going to get to Glow? When am I going to get to Glow? When am I going to get to Glow? And I always know I have to get to it, and every single time it never ceases to amaze me. I'd say that, if anything, my problem with season 3 was that this was the season that kind of started to overstretch itself a little bit, where you're absolutely right. The show does an impeccable job of making you feel for every single one of the characters. I just feel like this was the season where things started to get a little bit cluttered, and it started to lose focus just a little bit. Not enough to take away from my enjoyment, but it was something that I did notice a lot. So moving on to...
And hold on real quick, I'll give you that. But one thing I do like is the way that finale sort of saved it for me.
Yes.
Not only saved it, but has me very excited to see how we sort of sift through the fallout. So,
Absolutely.
So with that being said, moving on to your number 3.
But you are right. Wait for season 4. So now, top 3. So, like I said, bouncing off of a lot of the points that I made with my number 4 choice, The Loudest Voice. Number 3, again, it's another catch-up effort, another real quick miniseries that I was able to get over with in a couple days, and another series that just... Man, another excellent piece of history, just one that just had a complete wallop on me. And going back to When They See Us, I was pissed when this show beat out When They See Us for the best miniseries Emmy, and then I actually watched the show, and I'm like, oh fuck, this show actually really did deserve it. And that's Chernobyl.
I knew it.
Developed by Craig Mazin, and holy shit. So again, another area of history that I always knew about because everyone knows about Chernobyl, but I was just largely unfamiliar with just the overall fallout and impact that it had. And that's what this show does so brilliantly. Continuing again what The Loudest Voice did, which is portraying this event as the horror show that it is, in the most realistic sense of what true horror really is. I just love how this show showed how this one event not only erupted as a result of human stupidity and overconfidence, but just how that sense of overconfidence can lead to just loss of human life on a scale that is just untantamount. Like I feel like has not been equaled. Like I know that the nuclear meltdowns in Japan obviously equaled it, but we still have not had an incident like Chernobyl since then. And literally watching those bodies as they were decomposing, they literally don't even look like human beings, and you just feel so bad for them because I'm literally getting choked up talking about it because that's just the impact that the show had. And in 5 fucking episodes, 5 goddamn episodes, it managed to have that sort of an impact. And it's anchored by another 3 incredible performances. Again, the biggest thing that I could, for me, the only flaw I would say is that kind of the individual actors' performances, that being portrayed by Jared Harris, Stellan Skarsgård, and Emily Watson, their own individual performances kind of pale in comparison to the overall incident and event that this show provides, and how it is structured, with showing episode 1, the event, episode 2, the immediate aftermath, episode 3, trying to deal with it, episode 4, making sure that they close it off, and then episode 5, the court trial, and getting to the bottom of what it is that caused it. It's brilliantly started, beginning, middle, and end wrapped up. I feel like this show, above all the other miniseries that I saw this year, included everything that to me is what makes miniseries at this point more compelling about these types of events than movies do. Than I feel like movies did. I feel like you never would have gotten nearly the impact, nearly the amount of effort going into this if it had been a movie as opposed to a TV show. And yeah, like it's one of the few shows that almost made me cry. Like that's how much of an impact this show had on me. And I was not expecting that at all, because you know how I am when it comes to hype. So that's my number 3 of the year, Chernobyl.
Wow. Well, that's high praise. I'll certainly be checking that one out. For me, my number 3 show of the year is one of the best shows I've seen in this genre for many reasons, but the most important reason is because I hope, and I feel like the impact of the show sort of backs this with some data, some loose data, at least from what my social media feeds were flooded with when the show was really buzzing, was that I hope that it could just be sort of like a slap in the face to say, hey, instead of going to see X, Y, and Z Marvel movies that are slated, which is just the same script, just insert your different superhero, let's actually put our superheroes through A, something challenging, and B, something different. And so what we got from Amazon's The Boys is exactly that. The performances were awesome. We have a whole episode about it. I just want to keep rocking and rolling here to the end of the list. But what I got to say is, if I didn't praise it enough in our episode on the show when we dedicated a whole show to it, then let me do that now by just simply saying this is a must-watch. The new season has already been confirmed. It actually got confirmed like within the first week of dropping. That's how much of an impact this show had out the gates. So what are you doing? Wake up, smell the coffee, and watch The Boys, because it's a great show.
It's a great show. Now, so we each only have 2 options left. Now, Chris, before we started this podcast, I guessed
it can only be 2 shows.
It can only
is
be
that
2.
What you're saying?
It can only be 2. So I think we both gave the opinion that
you're right.
What our number 2 and 1s are. So if that's the case, then if we both have the same number 2 and number 1, then we should just get it out of the way. Let's say it at the same time. Ready? What is your number 2? Ready? 3, 2, 1.
Barry.
Season 2.
Oh no, sorry. Barry's my number 1.
Barry's your number 1?
Yeah.
Oh shit! Oh my god!
You did some mind coaxing
there.
Oh
my god! I wasn't even trying. We got some inverse there. All right. So if that's the case, then
and it's not
man,
because
how do
I'm
you
trying
want
to be
play
contrarian.
it? It's literally inversed.
Well, then I'll just okay. So the reason why Watchmen is my number 2 is because Barry has given me something yet again to look forward to, whereas Watchmen I loved so much, but if we're talking about television, and granted, limited series, they're on both of our lists, and rightfully so, because they still count. It's just that, for me, these characters are so undeniably loving in Barry, and not to say that they're not in Watchmen, but just because of the excitement that I have, and I factor excitement for upcoming seasons into a lot of my decisions on this list, which I think is a testament to the impact these shows have. And because every episode gets better, and I can't believe it because I watch it and I think to myself, okay, that was good. It was a good episode 1 of season 2, but there's no way it's going to be better than season 1. And by the end of season 2, it's fucking...
You're literally like, what the fuck did I just watch? Oh my god.
And you know, they've seen our Watchmen episode. They know how we feel about it. They got a 4.5 from you and a 4 from me.
No, I give it a 5.
Oh yeah, I got a 4.5 from me. I love Watchmen. It's just that the fact that I know I get more of this insane universe that Barry has created is the reason why it's my number 1, because I can't wait, man.
So that's ultimately the end of the day what makes the decision.
Yeah,
I feel bad because I thought we were going to have a roll. We're going to be like, yeah, same number 2, same number 1. And yeah, and it's honestly kind of insane because for almost kind of literally the reason why you have Barry as my number 1, as your number 1, that's why I have Watchmen at my number 1. So to talk about Barry just a little bit, because I feel like since we both have like the same options, just reverse, I feel like we can kind of talk about them in tandem.
Sure.
The thing that I loved about Barry season 2 is kind of all the same things that you said, where I very, very much enjoyed season 1. I enjoyed season 1 a lot. It was a great new TV show, kind of showing what Bill Hader was capable of, is kind of more outside of his comedy stars. He's always been one of the comedy people from the late 2000s that I thought had so much more going for him than just his comedy chops, and this was the first thing that actually showed that to me. I feel like that was continued brilliantly later on in the year with It Chapter 2, but it's like you said, man, how it kept managing to escalate with each subsequent episode. And that's a praise that I can attribute to Watchmen as well. But oh man, fucking that Ronnie Lilly episode, holy shit. Like, what? Like, I've seen individual bottle episodes, and then there's that, and then how it manages to continue with the tragedy and the comedy and mixing it together, and how that those creators, Bill Hader and Alec Berg, just love each and every one of those characters, like, almost to a fault, in a way, because literally, like, how it ultimately ends, like, I never once thought that I'm like, wait, a show about an assassin turned actor is going to be the next Breaking Bad? What? But honestly,
true.
Barry is the spiritual successor to Breaking Bad. I'm not even kidding. Like, I am so excited to see where this show goes. I didn't think there was going to be anything that topped...
My favorite monologue, regardless of film or TV from this entire year, comes from Sally when she's sitting by the pool.
Oh my God,
oh my God,
one-shot monologue where she just keeps going, and it keeps going and going and going, and you're forced to listen, and by the time you're ending, you just want to, like, weep for her. And Bill Hader's reaction, oh my God, dynamite. And so, but as much and as compelling as Barry was, and for as how much as I loved it, and for how much that I can't wait for season 2, kind of to bounce off of your point where excitement for future season kind of goes into that. That's something for me that, just me personally, I prefer to take each season of a TV show as it is. And I feel like kind of enjoying each individual facet of that show kind of, for me, helps to craft the experience. Because what I find is that hype for future seasons usually ends up kind of dragging it down for me. Case in point, I would say Daredevil Season 2, American God Season 2 is a big example of that. For how much I loved Season 1. Was that?
Game of Thrones?
Well, no, that's the thing, because Game of Thrones literally managed to escalate it with every single season. But I always took each season for what it is, you know? And so I feel like that is ultimately why, besides my own personal bias of towards the Watchmen universe overall, why I have Watchmen as number one is, besides all the things that we loved about that show, and for all the things that we talked about on our Watchmen episode, for me, the thing is that for Damon Lindelof to have the brass balls to ultimately make HBO's new Crown Ship show and then say, hey, I might not even want to do another season. And now here we are almost 2 months later, and we still have no announcement of season 2. And for how season 1 this season, if it is the first season or if it's the only season that we'll ever get of this show, for that show to end on such an open note, and for Lindelof to have, and still have it be as compelling as it was, and for it to say everything that it did in one goddamn season, like, that to me is like undisputed number one, like, absolutely. And for all the other things that we talked about, for it being kind of an inverse of the comic, utilizing the comics format, but for a new character, for a set of new characters, a new setting and everything, all the twists and turns that it did. I saw stuff in this show that I didn't even think I would ever see just in storytelling in general. Literally how he makes the fucking crux, the climax of the show, a literal goddamn time paradox that actually makes sense for once. Like, I've seen 15 million different time travel things, and it's all those things of where you just gotta not think about it, because every time you try and think about it, it just won't make sense.
Yeah, it's not Interstellar.
It always falls apart. Even the impeccable Back to the Future falls apart, especially because, you know, you have part 2 that comes along and kind of undoes a lot of what part 1 does that works so seamlessly. But
unfortunately,
when they bring Dr. Manhattan, they bring back Dr. Manhattan. And I knew Dr. Manhattan was going to be back in the show. And I honestly kind of have to give credit because, again, the same friend of mine that recommended Succession, literally, no joke, guessed who Dr. Manhattan was going to be on a fucking whim. You know, literally just out of nowhere. It's like, oh, it's this guy. I'm like, oh. And then I started to think about it. I'm like, holy shit, it has to be. Because there's nobody else on the show that it could possibly be. And then to literally make Dr. Manhattan, not only the linchpin of the story, have him only be in a few episodes, but also literally make his involvement and his ability to see time simultaneously all as one thing, and make that the goddamn time paradox both the kickoff and the wrap-up for the story. It's, again, that's something, again, I feel like the closest thing, and it's funny because I brought this point up on our Watchmen episode, but I actually never got to it, which is where I feel like the closest that Lindelof came to exploring this idea and concept was with season 4's episode, The Constant, and establishing that. Because in a way, The Constant is actually, I feel like, what explains for Lost's entire last season.
Which is also an homage to Lost. The Constant is one of the most fan-beloved episodes of Lost, which he has said in interviews. So
like,
I guess that mentality was there from the start.
Exactly. Hopping between the two characters. And in a way, it kind of establishes how Lindelof was the perfect person to take this over. You know, from of making this the true sequel that Watchmen deserves. And that's the other thing, too, is that, again, the marketing kept this very secret, but this is a sequel to Watchmen. And arguably to have it be on par and give us something new. But we talk about that all the time with sequels, you know, giving us something new versus what versus, to me, the idea of the truly great sequels are movies that, to me, almost at certain points feel like completely different products. You know, Aliens versus Alien, The Road Warrior versus Mad Max, Empire Strikes Back versus Star Wars, Dark Knight versus Batman Begins, you know, Terminator 2 versus Terminator.
Yeah.
Where almost of those sophomore efforts feel like completely different things. But this is something new.
It was meaningful.
Well, not just meaningful, but playing around with structure in a way that I've never seen done before. It was absolutely brilliant. And also, again, this is just just a personal gripe, but I talked a lot about the Watchmen movie and how for as many things as that movie gets right, there is an equal amount that it does get wrong. And for me, and almost kind of like this show, it almost kind of pulling like showing off a few like mini middle fingers at Zack Snyder, and Ryan Murphy too, with the American Hero story thing and all that. With the way it shoots its action sequences, but also this show gave me the Silk Spectre Ozymandias that the movie did not, because Gene Smart and Jeremy Irons as the only two, as it revealed, or later revealed three, but as two of the three returning characters from the original comic, and what they do and how they kind of fulfill and wrap up their characters that were so brilliantly set up by the comic, and to me, were done dirty in the movie. It's just only one of a few million praises that I give this show for being what it was, for wrapping up 2019 the way that it was. My number one favorite TV show, and possibly my favorite media product overall that I got in 2019, Watchmen.
So there you have it, guys. This is our list. You can see that we have some similar shows, but in different places. And I think that that's just a testament as to who we are as people. I'm always more of a sucker for comedy. So Barry wins out, taking that and spinning it a little differently. But you made a great case for Watchmen. And so, Dom, before we get out of here, let's just tell everyone where they can find us and what they can expect going forward for the next 12 years of the show. And, why don't
12
you...
12 years, man. 12 years. We're making that declaration. We're doing 2 years longer than Friends, but we're not going to jump the shark like The Simpsons did, because everyone knows after 2002, The Simpsons went downhill. So, if you guys have Anchor, if you guys don't have Anchor, you should get it. If you don't have Spotify, somehow you should get it. If you don't have Apple Music, you should get it.
Apple
Podcasts, all of the above. Google, what's it called? Wait, Google, you said it actually...
We're on Google now. We're on Google Podcasts.
Everything.
We're on Breaker, Stitcher, Radio Public.
Everything that you
Audible.
We're not on Audible, but
everything but that.
Everything that you could possibly get through the Anchor subscription service. Just go to any place where you listen to podcasts and type in these words: Talkin with no G TV or Talkin TV Podcast. You can follow us on all of our social media pages. Yeah. Follow us on the Facebook. Follow us on the Instagram.
And that's where on social media? At what?
At Talkin TV.
No G.
No G.
No G.
No
okay.
G at all.
That's cool. Now, Dom, this was a long episode.
It was. Another long episode.
So, they know where to find us. Absolutely. I'm at Christian Evanko. You're at The Movie Nerd.
Yep.
And so...
At Movie Nerd Reviews.
Movie Nerd Reviews. And with that being said, guys, I would be remiss if I didn't hand it over to Dom, because of all the facts that we dropped on this episode, there is one fact that we need to keep repeating because it is our mission, and Dom is the torchbearer of this mission here on Talkin TV. Dom, just fucking send this one.
From myself, the movie nerd, from Chris TVN. Watch more fucking movies. Good night.